Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I am going to tell you about the best books I read in the second quarter of 2020. I stole this idea from Dane of Dane Reads earlier this year. In Dane's video, I believe that he tends to give a list of 10 books per quarter. However, I might be the tiniest bit stricter, and last time I did this video, I only came up with 4 books, and so this time, despite the fact that I tried to think of 10 books, I felt like I couldn't really warrant 10 books when I'd only found 4 the first time round, so I was strict again, and I decided that I'd just pick out 4 books this time as well, and that means that there are currently 8 books in the running to make it to my top 10 list at the end of the year. Will all these books make it? Will some of the books that I've read earlier this year end up sticking longer in my mind and have changed my mind? Probably not. But I did read more books in the second quarter of the year as opposed to the first quarter, just because of some major event that happened that saw me stuck at home for 13 weeks. But let's not talk about that. The first book on this list is Himself by Jess Kidd, and this book follows the character of Mahoney after he returns to a small town in Ireland to find out the truth about his mother who went missing when he was a baby. This book has Jess Kidd's blend of humour and magic and the everyday, as well as being this brilliant look at small town life. You know me, you know that I like stories that are focusing on a village and have this very big community feel, like a character piece. That is very much what it feels like. This is Jess Kidd's debut, so I didn't expect it to be as good as the 2 books that I've read of hers, The Hoarder and Things in Jars, but it was just as fantastic. Jess Kidd is definitely one of my favourite writers. She just taps into that sense of the gothic and the macabre and the creepy, but blends it so well with humour that it works for me. It's a bit like when I used to watch The Addams Family or any sort of those supernatural shows that ended up having the touch of whimsy and heart about them. Yeah, I adore Jess Kidd's writing, I adore her characters, and I think that she blends the grotesque and the stereotypical really well to create this great blend of fiction. And I'm really looking forward to her children's book, if that's not out already. I don't know. I heard it announced, but I don't know what's going on with that currently. The next book that I included is Legendary Children by Tom Fitzgerald and Lorenzo Marquez. This is the first decade of Drag Race and the last 100 years of queer history. What goes on in this book is that this is basically an introduction to queer history, and there is a list of sources at the back for the reader to go off and examine to learn more about what the writers are talking about. But it also shows the reader challenges from RuPaul's Drag Race and how they have been influenced by queer history of the last 100 years. I said in a recent video that the existence of this book makes me happy. It's not just because I am a fan of Drag Race, but also because I was learning more about what had helped influence one of my favourite shows. It was great to learn more about a part of life that I did not know about beforehand. This is an incredibly accessible book. It left me wanting to go and check out all of the sources that the writers have included in the back. There were a few small errors related to Drag Race where they said that certain girls had been on certain seasons and they definitely weren't. At the end of the day, I can forgive all that because of what I learned from the book. The next book shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, and that is The Eighth Life by Nino Haratischvili, translated by Charlotte Collins and Ruth Martin. This is a 934-page family epic that chronicles 100 years of life in Georgia, the country, not the state in America. This is fantastic. It has this question as to whether a family is actually cursed by their great-great-grandfather's chocolate recipe, and is all told from the perspective of Daria, who is narrating the story to her niece. And you get this sense that she's telling the story so that her niece doesn't make the same mistakes that have been made by their ancestors. But also it's a really great story. You see children grow up and become people that you no longer recognise, and that felt like something that does happen. We often have different opinions of people in our families when we're younger as opposed to when we grow up, as we learn more about them and we are no longer idolising them and we begin to question them. As people become their own people, they change and their lives are no longer as closely linked and intertwined as they might have once been. We see siblings' love tested as they make decisions that the other disagrees with. We see rifts grow in a family that began extremely closely, and setting it in Georgia, it felt like they were closed in and that they were constantly being observed by not only the reader but the government of the time. I learnt things that I didn't know about this country. I hadn't necessarily turned a blind eye to, but I couldn't be certain that I'd been taught before. It was just a great book to spend an extended amount of time with, and if you get the opportunity, I really do think that you wouldn't go wrong to read this. The fourth and final book on this list I read last month, and that is Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. This book follows Barrington, Barry as he's known to his friends, who has been married to Carmel for about 60 years, or with Carmel for 60 years in any case, but for all that time he has been having a relationship with his best friend Morris. He's reached a point in his life, in his 70s, where he's decided that he's lived a life for so long and he wants to spend his final days with his male lover, and that he's going to divorce his wife and do so. This book is another book that has the charm of Alan Bennett in that the voice is captured so well. Evaristo has done a really good job of showing us a character who's not thought about his actions. He's been a tiny bit selfish, and yet because you've been in his head, the reader sympathises with him, but then we get to see what other people and other characters have thought of his actions and what they think of him as a person. But it's also really funny, reads very quickly. I felt sympathy towards every single character going through this situation. It felt like a great book looking at how the world has changed, but because of the way the world was when Barrington was growing up, he still has some of those long-held beliefs and this internalised homophobia that he still ought to behave a certain type of way. And watching him come to terms with his identity and how the world has changed was really fantastic. I think that Evaristo's done a brilliant job, and it did ultimately probably change my original opinion of Girl, Woman, Other, and I would be more interested in going back and reading that book after reading this one, because I think that I might be getting what Evaristo's doing as a writer now. I can't believe that I never knew of her before Girl, Woman, Other, because her back catalogue looks as though she's always been doing something different with every single book, and I can appreciate that. So them's the books. If you've read any of them and would like to discuss them, please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.